Imagine your workplace is a stone tower. There is no road to it, no backyard, no village, no place to walk after dinner. Outside the front door is the Atlantic Ocean, and your shift lasts 2 months. Not 8 hours, not 5 days, 2 months. There are 3 of you inside. You cook there, sleep there, work there, wait there, and every evening, one thing matters more than almost anything else. The light has to come on, because somewhere beyond the walls, ships are navigating through some of the most dangerous waters around Britain. You may be tired, the weather may be terrible, the sea may make it impossible for anyone to reach you. It does not matter, the light still has to work. This was life at Bishop Rock Lighthouse, a 49-meter granite tower standing on a tiny rock 4 miles west of the Isles of Scilly, exposed directly to the Atlantic. By the 1970s, its keepers were spending 2 months at a time inside the tower before returning to their families for a month ashore. And when you first look at a lighthouse like this, the obvious question is, how did they survive the storms? But that is actually only the beginning, because surviving inside a lighthouse requires solving something much stranger. How do you turn a vertical stone machine into a home? Bishop Rock exists because this part of the ocean was dangerous enough to demand a warning. The rocks around the Isles of Scilly had wrecked ships for centuries. Trinity House eventually decided that the existing lights were inadequate and that a lighthouse was needed on the westernmost danger. The problem was that Bishop Rock was almost comically unsuitable for construction. The rock ledge is only about 46 meters long and 16 meters wide. It rises steeply from deep water, and it receives the full force of the Atlantic. The first solution was not the lighthouse you see today. Engineers tried an iron structure supported by piles. By the end of 1849, it was almost finished. Then, on February 5, 1850, a gale removed the entire thing, before the light had even been installed. That is a fairly direct performance review from the Atlantic. So they tried again. This time, the answer was granite. Huge blocks were individually shaped, numbered, fitted together, dovetailed and keyed into position. The construction site was so exposed that workers could only reach the rock when weather allowed. It took 7 years. In September 1858, the light finally began operating. And even that was not the final version. The sea continued attacking it. During one storm, waves reached high enough to tear a 5 and 50-pound fog bell from the lighthouse gallery. Later, inspections found weaknesses serious enough that engineers essentially built a new, stronger lighthouse around the existing one. By 1887, the strengthened tower contained about 5,700 tons of granite. So before we even discuss the keepers, understand what their house was. It was not a building near the ocean. It was a building designed to be hit by the ocean, repeatedly, for decades, with people inside. Now imagine arriving for work. At most jobs, getting through the front door is not a story. At an offshore rock lighthouse, it can be the most dangerous part of the day. Before helicopter access became practical, relief crews and supplies depended heavily on boats and the sea being cooperative. And the sea did not receive a copy of the schedule. If weather prevented a relief, you stayed. Trinity House accounts describe rock lighthouse reliefs being delayed for weeks because boats simply could not approach safely. In extreme circumstances, crews could begin running low on fresh provisions while vessels waited offshore for a chance to get supplies onto the rock. Bishop Rock itself produced a spectacular example. A BBC team once visited intending to spend only a few days there. Bad weather trapped them with the lighthouse keepers for nearly a month. Fresh food dwindled. They eventually asked permission to open emergency stores. When conditions finally allowed evacuation, the men had to leave the tower suspended by rope over the surf toward a lifeboat. This tells you something important about lighthouse life. A shift schedule is only meaningful if the ocean agrees with it. If it does not, Tuesday becomes Wednesday. Wednesday becomes another week, and home remains visible only as an idea. Inside Bishop Rock, the environment changed completely. Outside, waves, wind, spray, noise, nothing horizontal for any meaningful distance except ocean. Inside, a series of small circular rooms stacked vertically inside granite. A 1974 documentary about Bishop Rock described a world where 3 keepers lived together for 2-month stretches. Contemporary accounts described some of the rooms as only around 12 feet across. That means the lighthouse was not really a house. It was more like a vertical apartment compressed inside a chimney. Kitchen, living space, bedrooms, storage, machinery, watchroom, lantern. Instead of walking down a hallway, you climbed. And if you wanted a change of scenery, your options were limited. One account from a visitor stranded at Bishop Rock described essentially living in the same small room, with variety coming from going upward toward the light or downward toward machinery. This makes one of the hidden problems obvious. The lighthouse had to protect humans from the ocean, but once it succeeded, the humans were trapped inside the protection. Now consider the most important machine in the building, the light. Today, we are used to lighting being almost insulting in its simplicity. Press switch, room becomes bright. Done. Historically, lighthouse keeping was not that. Trinity House instructions from 1839 ordered keepers to light the lamps at sunset and keep them burning brightly until sunrise. And because the light had to remain reliable, someone had to maintain a continuous night watch. When one keeper's watch ended, he prepared the lamps before waking the next keeper. The instructions even specified trimming the wicks at regular intervals to maintain maximum light. Think about what this means. Night after night. Someone is awake because the light cannot be allowed to simply take care of itself. This was not illumination. It was maintenance disguised as light. At Bishop Rock, a later generation of equipment was still surprisingly hands-on. Accounts surrounding the 1974 documentary describe lighting up as a ritual involving meths, paraffin, heating equipment, and a large mantle. It was not simply switch on, it was a process. And above all of it sat the enormous optic. Glass and machinery designed to take one light source and send its warning far across the sea. One contemporary description marveled that the keepers could move roughly 11 tons of optical equipment around its mercury, bearing with remarkable ease. That is lighthouse engineering in one image. Thousands of kilograms of glass, moving delicately enough to produce a precise signal, inside a granite tower being punched by the Atlantic. And 3 men are responsible for making sure it continues doing that. But the light was only one system. The keepers also had to maintain something much more fragile, themselves. Because a lighthouse is useless if the people operating it become exhausted, hungry, sick, or unable to work. Food therefore becomes logistics. You cannot walk to a grocery store. If you forgot milk, you have made peace with that decision. Supplies arrive during relief operations, and because weather can delay the next visit, provisions have to account for uncertainty. Historical accounts from Trinity House repeatedly describe keepers preparing food and supplies before leaving for rock stations, with families sending groceries, letters, and parcels with the relief vessel. One keeper's wife recalled periods when rough winter weather repeatedly delayed reliefs, which turns an ordinary household activity into risk management. How much food do 3 people need? How long until the next relief? What if the sea adds 10 days or 20? What do we keep in emergency stores? In the Bishop Rock incident, where the BBC crew became stranded, fresh food eventually ran low enough that emergency beef and biscuits were considered. A pantry normally stores food. Here, it also stores time. Water becomes equally strange. A home on land usually connects to a system you almost never think about. Pipes bring water in, pipes take waste out. The lighthouse has to recreate enough of that system in the middle of the sea. And saltwater is not particularly impressed by how thirsty you are. The 1974 account of Bishop Rock described taps, distinguished not simply as hot and cold, but by sources including fresh water and rainwater. Again, something invisible in ordinary life becomes visible here. At home, water is a service. At Bishop Rock, water is inventory. You have to know where it comes from, where it is stored, what it is for, how much remains. This is a recurring, oddly possible pattern. The more hostile the environment becomes, the more ordinary life reveals itself as a collection of systems, water, food, heat, light, sleep, waste, communication. At home, these disappear into the background, at a rock lighthouse. They are the background, and if you enjoy seeing the invisible systems that make human life possible in places where it really should not be convenient, subscribe. Because the hardest part of Bishop Rock was not keeping 3 people alive during one dramatic storm. It was making this strange little vertical world function, day after day, when nothing dramatic happened at all. That brings us to routine. Because there is a romantic version of lighthouse keeping. One man, a pipe, a magnificent storm, possibly a beard of unreasonable quality. He stares nobly into the distance while the sea attempts to kill him. Real lighthouse keeping involved considerably more cleaning. The equipment had to be maintained. Glass had to remain clean. Machinery had to be checked. Logs had to be kept. Stores had to be managed. Meals had to be cooked. Rooms had to be cleaned. Weather had to be observed. The light had to be prepared. And then the same things happened again tomorrow. Trinity House's historical instructions required principal keepers to account carefully for oil and stores, record consumption, and maintain journals describing events and observations. This is an important difference. The job was not be heroic during storms. The job was be reliable during boredom, for months, in a confined space, with the same people. That may actually be harder, because there were 3 human beings inside this machine, and humans require more maintenance than optics. The Bishop Rock documentary captured 3 keepers sharing the tower for extended periods. They cooked, cleaned, listened to radio, maintained equipment, passed the time, and lived in rooms small enough that privacy was limited. Contemporary reviews of the documentary explicitly noted the psychological strain implied by sharing such a confined environment for months. There is nowhere to commute to after an argument, no cafe, no evening walk through town, no separate apartment. You cannot say, "I need some space." Space is currently 3,000 miles of Atlantic. The only usable part belongs to all 3 of you. So, social compatibility becomes another lighthouse system, not written in granite, not powered by paraffin, but necessary. People need routines, boundaries, shared responsibilities, tolerance, and perhaps the ability to hear the same story more than once. Because after 7 weeks, some stories are coming back. Sleep is also unusual. The lighthouse never sleeps in the way the humans inside it want to. Historically, night watches meant responsibility was divided through darkness. One keeper could sleep because another was awake. Then they changed places. Trinity House's 19th century rules explicitly required perpetual night watch and prohibited sleeping furniture in the lantern or watchroom. This creates another fascinating reversal. At home, you lock the door and the outside world largely takes care of itself. At the lighthouse, the reason you are there exists precisely because the outside world cannot be ignored. Someone must be responsible, even at 2 a.m., even when the weather is terrible, especially when the weather is terrible, and storms changed more than comfort. They changed access, they changed noise, they changed sleep, they changed the possibility of rescue, and occasionally they attacked the building hard enough to remove pieces of it. Remember the 550-pound fog bell? The sea tore it from the gallery. Imagine being inside when that happens. There is an important psychological distinction between knowing intellectually that the tower is strong and listening to thousands of tons of seawater test that theory from your bedroom. Yet the tower's strength was exactly what made normal life possible inside. The keepers could cook tea while waves struck granite outside. They could write logs, open tins of food, listen to the radio, sleep. That may be one of the strangest things about extreme environments. Humans normalize almost anything, if the system protecting them works consistently enough. Eventually, the extraordinary becomes the walls of your kitchen. Then there is medical risk. On land, being sick can be unpleasant. On a rock lighthouse, illness can become a transportation problem. If someone needs to leave, someone must reach the tower, and the sea may not allow it. Trinity House's historical accounts of lighthouse tender crews describe how difficult it could be to evacuate sick keepers from rock stations. Transferring someone from lighthouse to boat could involve ropes, hoisting systems, stretchers, and dangerous seas before the vessel could even begin the journey toward medical help. Again, the lighthouse reverses something ordinary. On land, the patient goes to the hospital. At sea, first you have to solve the ocean. By the 20th century, technology gradually began removing some of these problems. Lighting systems improved. Electrical systems arrived. Helicopters transformed access to some offshore stations. Automation reduced the need for permanent human crews. Bishop Rock was converted to automatic operation in the early 1990s, and its final keepers left on December 21st, 1992. Today, the lighthouse is remotely monitored and controlled by Trinity House, and this is where the story becomes slightly strange, because automation did not remove the purpose of the lighthouse. The lights still had to work. The ship still needed the warning. The rock was still there. The storms were still there. What disappeared was the requirement for people to live inside the machine. For more than a century, human beings had filled the gaps that automation eventually closed. They watched, adjusted, cleaned, recorded, repaired, cooked, waited, and stayed. Look again at Bishop Rock from a distance. It appears simple, a tower, a light, ocean. But the tower was never just a tower. It was simultaneously a navigation system, a machine room, a fuel store, a water system, a kitchen, a bedroom, a workshop, a communication point, and a temporary home. And the keepers were never merely men who turned a lamp on at sunset. They were part of the machinery, not metaphorically, operationally. The light depended on their routines, their sleep schedules, their maintenance, their food supply, their cooperation, their ability to keep working when relief was delayed, their willingness to remain inside the tower while the ocean decided whether anyone could come or go. And that changes the way you look at lighthouse keeping. The impressive part is not simply that people survived on a rock in the Atlantic. Humans can survive in uncomfortable places. We have established that quite thoroughly. The remarkable part is that they made the place dependable. Ships did not need Bishop Rock to be brave. Ships needed Bishop Rock to be boring, predictable, night after night, storm after storm, the same light, at the correct time, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. And for decades, that reliability depended on 3 people living inside a granite tower where stepping outside could mean stepping directly into the Atlantic, 2 months on the rock, 1 month home, then back again. Not because anyone needed humans to conquer the ocean, but because one small light could not be allowed to go out.